Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Beech Leaf Disease Research Identification and Forest Pest Hunter Training. Okay, my name is Sean Kittle, and I am the Communications Director with the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program, but you're not going to hear from me a whole lot today. We have two other speakers that I'm going to hand it off to in just a minute. Our first speaker, our headliner, if you will, is Mina Vescera. She's with Nursery and Landscape Specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension. And then we have Ari Giller-Leinwohl. He is the Terrestrial Invasive Species Project Manager with APIPP, the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to do this little introduction here. It's only going to last for a couple more minutes, and then we're going to get right into it. Mina's going to do an introduction to beech leaf disease. She's going to talk about beech leaf disease biology, symptoms. She's going to talk about beech trees and forest ecosystems, pesticide efficacy trails, upcoming trials regarding forest management. That'll go until about 11 o'clock. We will have a Q&A after Mina's talk, so if you could please hold your questions until about 10:50 or so. Feel free to type questions into the chat. And once we work through those, we'll let folks come off mute and ask questions directly if they'd like. After Mina, we're going to have Ari with Forest Pest Hunters volunteer program. That's APIPP's volunteer program. And he's going to just walk you through how to become a forest pest hunter, how to monitor for beech leaf disease, and how to report what you find or don't find to iMapInvasives, which is New York State's online invasive species database. After that, we'll have some just final questions and closing remarks. And we'll have another Q&A at the end as well. So if you think of something, while Ari's speaking and would like to ask it later, that'll be fine. All right, we are offering, New York State, I should say, is offering 1.25 credits, pesticide credits for categories 2, 3A, 9, 10, and 25. In order to receive the credits, you must view the entire webinar, and then you have to complete a 10-question evaluation by noon on Friday, August 9th. So it's about 2 days from the webinar. There are unlimited attempts, and you need at least 70. It's 10 questions, so you need 7 out of 10 correct in order to pass. The certificates will be mailed to the address that you provide. So this is very important. There's an address field in the quiz. Please, please, please make sure you fill in your address and your certification number. We can't give you the credits without those. And a link to the quiz will be provided at the end of this training. I'll put that right into the chat for everyone so you have it. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Mina.
All right, thanks so much, Sean. It's wonderful to be here with everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Sean. Is that okay?
Yeah, that works.
All right, so I have to see if I can find it. Share. There we go. I'm just going to get rid of these floating meeting controls and choose my highlighter. Oops, I think I chose the wrong thing. There we go. All right, can everyone hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me minimize all of these. Okay, good morning, everyone. So we're going to get started with kind of reviewing beech leaf disease and discussing some of the research. This is going to be a general introduction to the disease. I think there are some of you in the audience that are well versed about beech leaf disease, but in terms of today's talk, it's going to be basically a review of symptoms so you can kind of get to know what to expect when you look for this disease in the field. And we'll discuss a little bit about biology and then also forest ecology of American beech in general. So there it is right there on the screen, beech leaf disease. The pathogen that is associated currently with this disease, because it is a new disease from 2012, new in the world, is a nematode. So Littlelenchus is a fairly new species, or genus, I should say, of nematode. I'm going to go ahead and admit that person that just popped up on my screen. Littlelenchus was discovered a few years ago now, I believe in New Zealand, as being a pest of a species that doesn't occur locally in our forests. So it's interesting now that this new species that was previously unknown is also being discovered as a pest of American beech and other beech tree species as well. It's titled subspecies McCannii because it's named after the person that did the genetics for the organism. Just want to review a little bit of the distribution of this pest. So back in 2012, it was first discovered in the world in forests in Ohio, and you can kind of see the distribution of spread thereafter. So these lighter colors going down to the pink. So this goes to January 2023, but there are, of course, there's more spread that happened this year as well. You have to wait until the following year, until spring, in order to truly understand the spread of the disease from the previous year. This map I received from New York State DEC in September of 2023. So there you have the first detection in New York State. And I am not from New York State, so I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly. Chautauqua, I think that's pronounced,
Um,
Chautauqua County.
excuse me,
Uh,
Mina. I don't think your
yes.
screen is being shared.
My screen is being shared. Okay, so I
I
guess,
can see it as shared.
Yeah,
Okay, you guys
Sean,
can
I
see it.
can see it as well.
Okay, good, good. Okay. Sorry, I just saw a message in the chat and I wasn't seeing it. I think I'm seeing it now. Okay.
okay, yeah, please, if
Sorry about
anything goes awry,
that.
definitely interrupt me. I welcome interruptions. All right,
Okay,
thanks, Sean.
perfect.
All right. Okay, so the first detection in New York State was back in 2018, and it's, way over in the western part of the state, next to where beech leaf disease was first detected in Ohio. And it's just been spreading ever since. So this map goes until 2023. There were 11 new counties that this disease was detected in 2023. And I checked with Sandra Jensen, Marjorie Daughtry, and I, who I'll introduce to you in a second with pictures, that I checked in with her to learn about any new detections for the Adirondacks, because I'm not familiar with the detections in Adirondacks, where I'm way down here in Suffolk County. But I guess Herkimer County back in 2022 and this year in Oneida County. And I have another map that Marjorie did a screenshot of a beech leaf disease talk that she participated in yesterday. And so if this is, I think this is Herkimer, and you can kind of see where these detections are throughout the counties. So it looks like it's down in the southern part of, I think this is Oneida County right here. So hopefully something biological will come along that will provide management of this nematode as this disease continues. There's always hope that that happens when you have an increase in population of a pest, that you will have something biological comes along that realizes, hey, look at all this food. I can actually use this as an energy source. So fingers crossed that that happens. Let's review some of the symptoms now and the symptom progression for this disease. Something that's initially noticed with this disease is this banding that occurs within the leaves. They're also called shallow galls, and that's where the nematodes are residing within the leaf. These nematodes will also be on the surface of the leaf, on the surface of everything under the sun, pretty much, as researchers have learned in terms of distribution in the forest. But in terms of where they reside and reproduce within the leaf, that is within these shallow galls. And when you look up into the canopy, when you're standing underneath these majestic trees, those bands or galls are darker than the rest of the leaf. So they are very evident, but when you have a nice full canopy, with beech trees, they tolerate shade very well, so their leaves go throughout the lower branches of the canopy. It can be really hard to detect this disease in the first 1 or 2 years of infection. As the disease progresses, these symptoms progress. So you'll start seeing more leaves that have more banding. And that means that the nematode has increased in population. The more bands that you have, the more nematodes that are occupying that leaf. And then continuing on, when you have such an abundance of nematodes on the trees, they start really damaging the tissue. So you'll end up with these, what they call rugose, or really thickened leaves. They're distorted. The cell structure of those leaves are being drastically changed by the nematodes feeding within the tissue of that leaf. So here you have some normal healthy leaves, but then you have some clusters where the nematodes resided in those buds over winter. They were feeding in those buds in that tissue, and that's where you have the symptoms that have occurred. You can have thousands, excuse me, of nematodes that reside within these buds and in these leaves at any given time once they actually take occupancy within that tree. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Now, of course, with this feeding comes a lot of damage, and then also there certainly is death of the bud. I briefly mentioned that, we're getting to know the life cycle of this nematode. And for the most part, it resides in the leaves, and then it overwinters in the buds, and it reproduces in the buds and in the leaves. For what we understand now, this nematode does not have any of its life cycle within the soil environment, but certainly this nematode loves moisture, loves water. It will fall onto the soil, but as far as we understand now, none of its life cycle occurs within the soil. So in the springtime, when beech leaf disease leaf out, there is a lot of the nematodes that were overwintering within this bud are basically on the surface of the leaves. But interestingly enough, we can't find the nematodes within the leaves until about mid-June or July or so. And I don't think that's fully understood where they go. So there's a lot that needs to be understood about the life cycle of this pest. But as the nematodes increase in population on the tree, and as they enter the buds, probably around August on, they'll enter the buds, they'll go underneath the bud scales, and they'll reside there to overwinter. They can cause a lot of damage to the buds. And so if the damage is high enough, they will unfortunately kill the bud. And so that's where you end up with these thinning of the canopies of these trees. This tree is from 2019 here in Suffolk County. And that's when the homeowner noticed, my gosh, what is going on with my tree? And this is probably around year 3 or 4 of the progression of this disease within this tree. So when you see a tree at this state, it can be, in terms of how much longer does the tree have, it's uncertain, but basically what they're saying is tree mortality is anywhere from 3 to 6+ years. So 3 years definitely for the younger saplings. It's going to take a lot longer to kill some of the mature trees. And this pest affects all beech species as far as we know. Some species that are in Japan, it doesn't kill the trees. It may cause some symptoms, but it doesn't kill them. But that's also a different species, or it's a different variant of the nematode that causes beech leaf disease. In addition to the progression of this disease, where you have bud death, you have the thinning canopies, you'll see that the trees will thin from the bottom up. I mentioned that this nematode really likes moisture and humidity, and so those lower limbs tend to be a more humid environment, and so that promotes greater population of the nematode. So you'll see a thinning or death of buds in these trees from the bottom going up. But what happens as a response to these dying limbs and to these dead buds, the trees put out a second flush of leaves. And so that's that image that you see here on the right. This is not American beech. This is a European beech at a nursery here on Long Island. And all of these lighter green colored leaves, that's the second flush that the tree put out because it realized, I've lost some of my canopy. I think I should push out more growth in order to survive. And I think when this happens with American beech and people have this, say, an American beech in their yard, or a cluster of trees in their yard, they think, oh, okay, my tree is doing really well. But it means that the tree is stressed out and it's trying to make up for the loss of leaves. These leaves that come out for the second flush, because they were dormant buds that the nematodes from the previous season didn't have access to, they will not have any of the beech leaf disease symptoms associated with them. It can be difficult, as I mentioned, to detect this disease in the early stages of it. When you're walking through a beech forest, people are looking up in amazement, I would like to think, because beech forests are beautiful. So when you have this many leaves affected, it is likely the third or fourth year of the disease. As I mentioned, you really need to have that increase in population in order to have many leaves affected where it's easy to notice them. Here on the screen is a European beech tree. There are many gorgeous European beech trees here on Long Island that people have a great emotional attachment to. And the disease affects European beech trees as well. The progression of the symptoms is a little different compared to American beech. So here you have the banding on a copper or on a purple beech, and you can kind of see the galls there. This leaf has several galls. This one doesn't have as many, but it's noticeable, especially in the springtime for these purple beeches. On the bottom, it's particularly noticeable where you have that darkening of that tissue. I mentioned I've been working with Marjorie Daughtry, the plant pathologist for Cornell University. She's based out of the Long Island Horticultural Research and Extension Center here in Suffolk County. And I've been working a lot with her in terms of monitoring this disease, learning about it since 2018 forward. Margie, probably even before then, because we've heard of this disease affecting beech out of our area. So it's been great working with Margie. And what we started doing in 2020 was just making observations because the progression of these symptoms wasn't fully understood. So we had our test tree over at Wildwood State Park in Wading River, New York. And you can kind of see all the little blue flags that we put on because we were monitoring a lot of buds on this tree over the growing season. I just wanted to outline the tree there. This tree is definitely a sapling of some of the mother trees. And the biggest thing that we learned from this is that when the tree leaves out in the springtime, and you can easily see the galls that are the bands that are formed within those leaves, they do not increase. So if a leaf has 5 bands, it will remain 5 bands over the course of the growing season. So this stem is viewed here on May 13th. Here it is viewed on October 13th. Of course, the bands change, right? So they don't remain green because those nematodes within those bands or galls, they're damaging that tissue. And that tissue is essentially dying. And this is a great picture because you can notice that, those veins occur within the veins. Here are later pictures of some leaves of European beech as well. So that tissue changes greatly because of all the feeding that is occurring within that leaf. And sometimes what you'll have as well are tree and bush crickets that will feed on the leaves in general, because that's just what they do. But they'll also feed within that affected tissue that the nematodes are already damaging, and they'll eat the upper layer of it. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that picture of a European beech and that thinning from below that occurs. So the very top of those stems, they still appear healthy, and that could be because of all of that air movement that can dry up any type of wetness that can occur on the leaf that facilitates movement of that nematode. An example of the upper and lower surface of European beech leaf this provides a great example of what these bands can look like later in the season. And they certainly look like erinium mite bands as well. There's some lookalikes that can make you think you're looking at beech leaf disease, but it's not. And I just wanted to encourage you to visit the New York State DEC website, their beech leaf disease website. They have a lookalikes section, and it's wonderful for you to get to know some of the other pests that can attack this tree. And erinium patch is one of those pests that kind of create a similar symptom in terms of the banding underneath those leaves, but it's a completely different pest, and it doesn't kill the tree. Whereas, beech leaf disease will continue to progress those symptoms and eventually kill the tree. Now let's move on and get to know this nematode a little bit closer, a little bit more. So this nematode is microscopic. For the most part, you cannot see it with with your naked eye. You need pretty high magnification in order to view it, certainly in order to view it like this bottom image here. But in terms of comparing this nematode to other nematode species, it is quite large. And it's very noticeable when you're looking at it in a petri dish, as this image from Sandra shows. Usually when you look at these nematodes in solution that you've taken from the leaf, they are moving around like crazy. They're wiggling around quite a bit. So here you have examples of several different nematodes of this Luteoleucus that causes beech leaf disease. And these small little kind of tic-tac like structures, those are the eggs for the species. More examples, Mike Gaines is an arborist here on Long Island, and he has a very powerful microscope, and he has dedicated a lot of time in terms of getting to know this disease. And he took these amazing pictures of, again, here's that nematode and the eggs associated with the pest. You need about 60x magnification in order to see this pest under the microscope. Here's a great example of it on the leaf. So here you have a gall within that beech leaf. Here's some healthy tissue. And you just need a little bit of water in order to coax these nematodes to come out of the leaf. If the population is high enough and the conditions are moist on the leaf, they are going to be out there on the surface. This provides a cross-section of what a healthy beech leaf should look like. So this is out of Agricultural Experiment Station out of USDA. Here on the left-hand side is the cross-section of a healthy leaf. So you kind of get a sense of all the different layers of a healthy leaf. Here's that primary midvein. You have the epidermis here. I wanted to show you the schematic just to give you a sense of what the different sections are. But when you have nematodes that are occupying that leaf, they completely destroy that healthy cell structure of a leaf. So it gives you a sense of the destruction that the feeding and the reproduction of this nematode, these blue structures here, does to the actual physiology of the leaf. Let's take a closer look at the buds. I mentioned that these nematodes around mid to late summer, they begin migrating to the buds, and they'll overwinter underneath the bud scales. And here at the base, you can see the damage caused from their feeding. Researchers have taken estimates of how many nematodes overwinter in a single bud, and there are thousands upon thousands of nematodes that will be overwintering in these buds. So it's understood now that, as those nematode levels increase, then the likelihood of greater symptoms or the likelihood of death of that bud increases exponentially. For part of this presentation, I mentioned that I would review research that has been conducted, and Margie and I partnered with an arborist, the arborist that first discovered beech leaf disease here on Long Island, and it was at this property in Head of the Harbor. And we just wanted to test a few chemicals that would be appropriate for use in the landscape. The pesticides that I'm going to review are not appropriate for use in for a forest setting. They're more for trying to save specimen trees or remnant forests that you have on a property. So we selected various trees for a few different treatments. We wanted to look at fertilizer injection. We wanted to look at a product called abamectin, insecticide, and miticide because it had activity against nematodes, and then emamectin benzoate, which is normally used against emerald ash borer. They thought it would be effective against beech leaf disease as well. Here's Evan Dachau with Jolly Green and his father, Bob Dachau. He took some amazing pictures with his incredible camera. And this was back in 2019 when we were getting to know this property and establishing the trials. I've also worked with Mike Gaines, as I mentioned, on other projects with Peconic Land Trust, where they have a few forest preserves that were affected with beech leaf disease, and they allowed us to use their trees to also conduct tests with some of the same pesticides and an additional more pesticides as well. Here's just an overhead look of how we set up some of our trials. The different colors are associated with the different treatments. So this site with Peconic Land Trust, we also tested emamectin benzoate, which is injected at the base of the tree. We tested agrifos, which is like a polyphosphite type of chemistry, and it's used to protect beech trees against bleeding canker, Phytophthora disease. And it has been tested by Davy Tree out in Ohio to show efficacy against protecting saplings, but it takes about 6 years to show efficacy of that product. So we wanted to test it to see if it protected the mature trees. And this was back in 2021 and 2022 that these trials were done. And then we also had our control trees that we wanted to separate from our test trees. And within this particular trial, we tested abamectin as well on saplings. Some of these products that are applied to the canopy, it can be really difficult to get every single part of some of these large trees. So I wanted to test abamectin on some saplings. So we also had sapling control trees as well. And these were our control trees that were mature. So I know I'm kind of breezing through these trials because this is just a general introduction to them, but you can always take a screenshot of this. But this is just a list of our treatments that we use for those Peconic Land Trust trials. But the goal of testing these pesticides is to reduce that nematode population within that growing season in order to avoid bud injury and death. If you avoid bud injury, that means you're going to reduce the feeding within that leaf over the winter. And so you're reducing the population of the nematodes, you're reducing those banding symptoms and the thickening of the leaf symptoms. And then, of course, the best thing to do is to reduce bud death. And that it can only be done if you kill off the nematodes within that growing season. So none of these treatments were found to be effective, unfortunately. This I'm just going to show you are the labels for each of these products. Triage is the emamectin benzoate that has been found to be very effective against emerald ash borer, but uptake of this particular product was difficult for the beech trees, or it just wasn't effective in terms of getting into the buds. Avid is excellent against mites, but it wasn't found to be effective against killing the nematode on the beech trees. Agrifos, very effective against it's an immune booster in terms of increasing the defense of beech trees. It helps them with general decline. But within one growing season, it wasn't able to boost that immune system enough in order to reduce the symptoms the following year. This is just an example of some of the data I collected, percent leaf cover. I just wanted to highlight that just to give you an example. Here's the agrifos, that polyphosphate type of chemistry. leaf cover was 92% in June. It was 77% in October. And that's because some of these really rugose thickened leaves, they fall off. So that's another symptom with this disease. You will get leaf drop with it. I didn't mention that earlier, but I'll mention it now. An example, here's the control trees that didn't receive any treatment, 91% leaf cover, 74% by the end. So the following year, when I was, collecting my data again, the leaf cover, this was in May 23, and the leaf cover was very, very poor. So that initial leaf out caused me to cry. But when I returned in June, because of that second flush, the leaf cover increased. It doubled essentially. So the response of these beech trees to push out that second flush of leaves is really important, I believe, in terms of extending the life of these trees and being able to withstand the damage that this nematode does to the leaves and then to the buds. Broadform has been a very promising pesticide against killing this nematode. Broadform has been tested by researchers at Bartlett's, and it's been found to reduce the nematode populations within one growing season. So that means that the number of nematodes that are going to be overwintering within those buds is greatly reduced. So that means that damage from the feeding that occurs over the winter is greatly reduced. And the results are pretty dramatic. The only thing is, the caveat is, at least for here on Long Island, this product, Broadform, this active ingredient, was not allowed here on Long Island because we have water quality issues. We have chemicals that easily make their way down into our groundwater and cause a lot of issues in terms of contamination. So this product can only be used here on Long Island if with a special local needs label. I guess for the rest of New York, it has a 2EE label because normally this product is used for turf. It kills nematodes within turf. But the results are pretty amazing. Right now, the special local needs label states the rate to be used at 8 ounces per 100 gallon. Bartlett's is, tested that at the 8-ounce rate, very effective at reducing the symptoms the following year. They tested rates last year. So this is Marjorie and I accompanied the Bartlett crew in June of 2024, this past year, when they were taking their data. This is at a nursery down in Long Island here, and they wanted to see how low they could go with the rate. So here you have 6 ounces per 100 gallon, you have a control tree, 4 ounces per 100 gallon, control tree, 2 ounces, another control tree, and then over here you have 1 ounce per 100 gallon. Now, of course, you can't go against label. You always have to follow what the label says in terms of treating the tree, but they may be able to ask the producer of Broadform to offer a range, right? This particular trial also, they tested Broadform and then they rotated it with Agrifos, that product that is that polyphosphate type chemistry. Incredibly promising results. Broadform, apparently the active ingredients within it also does something to the physiology of the tree where it affects its growth. So that's why I think you see such a dramatic difference. So not only does it kill the nematode, but it also affects the physiology where it triggers some sort of growth response as well. So really promising results. We're going to see more out of this next year. This year, Bartlett, of course, they continue their testing, and they also are doing timing of their testing as well in terms of how many applications. I think they did 3 applications of Broadform. This year, they're testing to see if they can only do 2 applications of Broadform. And they're also thinking that because this product is so effective, it does not need to be applied every year because it reduces the nematode population that much. Another promising chemical is Arbitec 20S. We just learned that this product is effective where protects the tree for 2 years. And according to the New York State Special Local Needs label, it can only be used every 2 years. So it's a good thing that this product was shown to have efficacy in protecting beech trees for 2 years. So broad form is a foliar application. Arbortech is an injection. It's a trunk injection at the base of the tree. And Mark Ware, he just gave a webinar on this product and also just beech leaf disease management in general a couple of weeks ago. And here's some data that he shared with us. On the left-hand side of this bar graph, you see Arbortech. Here's year 1 of this trial where you have 70% of the canopy was affected, year 2, and then year 3. So these 2 years, this is 2 years after treatment, and you have much less of the canopy that was protected, that was symptomatic because of this disease, especially when you compare that to the actual non-treated trees. The thing is with Arbortech, in terms of initial symptoms of the tree, you need to make sure that you have some healthy leaves on the trees, because you want to make sure that you have good uptake from that injection. So if anyone is interested in using Arbortech, Mark suggests that you reach out to him. So you can just Google him, Mark Ware, Rainbow Ecoscience. I should have put his email on there as well. Feel free to reach out to me, but you can also Google him and reach out to him in terms of learning about how to apply this product effectively. Whenever you do these trials, you have to monitor for the nematodes. And it's surprisingly very easy, like I said, to extract this nematode out of the leaf. All we did with our trials, collected various leaves. It's best to get leaves that have bands in them. For the most part, leaves that don't have any bands, I haven't found any nematodes on them. Of course, you may get some if it's like wind-blown rain, you may end up with some nematodes on there, but the more bands that the leaves have, the higher concentration of nematodes that you'll have in the solution. And what I did is I copied a method from a researcher. Oh, shoot, I'm forgetting his name now. I believe his first name is Chris. So that's helpful. But if anyone is interested, I can share the information with you. But what you do is you simulate rain. So for 2 days, I just kind of spritzed in some deionized water into these cups, rained down on these leaves. On the 3rd day, I just looked at the solution with a microscope, and I basically jotted down what I observed. I certainly did not count the nematodes. Too many to count. Happened most of the time. I just estimated what I saw within each quadrant. If the nematodes are dead, they're rod straight. They're pretty, once you start seeing, many samples, you can pretty much distinguish, oh, there's just a hair that was on the leaf. There's just, Marjorie taught me what powdery mildew looks like under the microscope. So this nematode really does stand out once you become familiar with it. So in terms of where we are now, there still are more questions than answers, but a lot of answers have been provided in terms of how many researchers are studying this disease, locally, nationally, and internationally. As of right now, as far as I know, the disease has not been detected in Europe, which is wonderful. So it hasn't been detected in the European beech stands in Europe, but they're certainly keeping an eye on it. In terms of pesticide applications that are done this year, they really won't know if the symptoms have truly been reduced until the following spring. They can track nematodes, of course, but they won't know if the symptoms or the tree was saved until the following spring. So there are many studies underway still, other pesticides that are being tested, Biosar, azadirachtin, a neem-based product. I'm still awaiting on results for these trials. But other types of studies that are underway, there are researchers that are evaluating resistant specimens of American beech. I don't think they found any yet, but they're out there. And then the New York DEC, they were testing forest management practices. So more to come in terms of that. Real briefly, I'm going to discuss beech and the ecology and its importance. It's funny, when Marjorie and I first started kind of really looking at beech as an ecological species, right? Instead of just an ornamental species. We listened to a forestry webinar and how they were talking about how American beech was a nuisance species. And I guess because they can, the way they grow and the way they sucker, they can really remove diversity in a forest setting. So that was very, very interesting. I guess root suckers increase after understory disturbance. This can happen because of high presence of deer and injury to the roots. It can sucker. It can also be a response from beech bark disease, which we do have some instances of beech bark disease here on Long Island. And deer rather, certainly have a strong effect on regeneration, especially here on Long Island, where we have populations of 50 to 100 or more of deer per square mile. So in terms of regeneration, when these beech are affected and all sorts of light is allowed in the understory, oh gosh, it makes me cry when I think about the effect that the deer have on the regeneration of our forests. But, beech are very tolerant of shade, but they do not produce the suckers when you have high light. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in some of these forests that are affected. American beech is an important it plays an important ecological role in our forests. I had not known this prior, but it is a host for an early hair-streaked butterfly. It is considered one of the rarest butterflies throughout its range. I haven't had the pleasure of seeing one, but maybe some of you in the audience has. And it needs this kind of mature deciduous forest in order to thrive. American beech and then also Corylus cornuta is another species that it needs. Uh, Beech trees, American beech has a high wildlife value, especially the nuts. The nuts are actually more nutritious than acorns in that they're higher in protein and they're higher in fat as well. And they provide forage for a lot of different animals, not only squirrels, which are some of my favorite, but also turkeys and various types of birds and animals in general. And people too, as long as you process them correctly. Surprisingly, it can take several years for an American beech to produce these nuts. So beech nuts, they start producing around age 40, but it's not until age 60 or so where you start getting large quantities in terms of crops. And, beech trees are sensitive to frost, so that may affect the nut production as well. So everyone wants to know what will happen, what will fill in the gaps. And as I mentioned, it's really uncertain what will repopulate our forests. I'd be very curious to see what any of you have to say in terms of what will repopulate the forests up in the Adirondacks. But hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, something biological will come along that will, certainly help with decreasing the population of this nematode instead of coming up with some other means to do so, such as thinning. I hope all of you learned something from this presentation. I am happy to take any questions that you may have.
Mina, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
You're welcome.
I
Yeah.
learned a lot. I hope everyone else did too. Just checking the chat here to see.
All
Um,
righty.
we have one
People can.
here for LI, I'm assuming Long Island. Is there anything currently labeled, or do you know when something will be available for beech leaf disease?
Being labeled? Is that the?
Yeah.
Well, yes. So Broadform and Arbortech are currently labeled for beech leaf disease. So if you go on New York State, if you go on NICEBAD, their pesticide database, you can download that label, and that special local needs label will tell you how to use it for beech leaf disease, because the actual label associated with those products does not have beech leaf disease on there currently. There are other products that are labeled for nematodes, as I mentioned, abamectin, emamectin benzoate. However, in our trials and other people's trials, those products have not been found to be effective against beech leaf disease. So currently, Broadform and Arbortech are labeled for it, but they are restricted use products. So you need a pesticide applicator, a New York State pesticide applicator, in order to apply those, in order to purchase them and apply them.
Thanks. Mina, there was a question that was asked earlier, and Ari did respond in the chat, but I thought it might be interesting just for you to touch on it for a second. Did you mention earlier that the nematode is a newly identified species?
Yes. So this particular species of Lydilenchus had not been known before. It wasn't a known pest. As you can imagine, there are a lot of microbes out there that haven't been named by scientists. However, this genus, the Lydilenchus, was observed by a scientist, and I can try and bring up that slide. I have it in another presentation that I got from Marjorie. She mentions the actual species. So I think it was in New Zealand where a scientist realized, what is going on with this tree? It has a symptom I've never observed before. And that's because of, go to 2023 here. And that's because it was a new nematode species that hadn't been previously identified. So I'm sorry, I'm opening up the presentation so I can find that particular slide. Yeah, so here it is. So it's Lydilenchus coprosma, Lydilenchus coprosma, and it's from leaves of Coprosma repens. So that's a particular tree species down in New Zealand. I can send this, I'll send this slide to Sean so he can share it with everyone. But it was back in 2011, it was a new genus and a new species for New Zealand. So it's, interesting that the beech leaf disease pathogen, this nematode was also found to be genetically related to that Lydilenchus. So that's why, this one is Lydilenchus crenity, subspecies McCannii. There is a Lydilenchus crenity in Japan that was found to be associated with the Japanese beech, but it doesn't kill that beech tree. And genetically, it's not the same species or it's not the same strain as nematode that's affecting the beech trees here in the United States. There are scientists that are looking at the genetics very closely of this nematode, and they're trying to see, is there a New England strain? Is there an Ohio strain? So much research is being done on this pathogen right now, and of course, of the tree species as well.
Great. I've got another one here that I think is a good follow-up. Before I read it, though, I just want to throw it out there to everyone. Mina does have to take off after this Q&A, so if you have questions for her, please ask them now because she won't be around in 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, and you can
Um,
email me as well.
yeah, we can provide you with her email. Thank you for that. So I think you've already kind of touched on this, but if there's anything else, to add, feel free. You mentioned the nematode impacting trees in New Zealand, not American beech. Do you know if these nematodes are found worldwide and are they impacting trees wherever they are found?
Wait, okay, so I see it here. You mentioned the nematode impacting trees. Yep. Do you know if so is that the question that you just asked me? Do you know if these
Yes.
nematodes, okay. So I kind of just touched upon that, but this nematode, Lydilenchus, is found worldwide. But prior to 2011, this genus, this genera was unknown, at least from my understanding. Uh, so it's interesting that in 2011, they found this new nematode that was causing a symptom to this tree in New Zealand. And, it's a pathogen to this tree. And so now here, and then in 2012, this nematode that was previously unknown, that was related genetically to the one in New Zealand, was found to be causing issues to beech trees. They didn't identify what was affecting these beech trees until several years after 2012. In 2012, they're like, what's going on with our beech trees? They're observing the symptoms. And then they realized, researchers realized, oh, okay, a nematode is affecting this. And then after doing the exploration of the genetics, they realized this is related to this previously unknown nematode from New Zealand. And then, after even more research and, this is all kind of like sharing of knowledge across the world. In Japan, they have this other Lettilenchus nematode that affects their beech trees, but again, it's different strains. So I am not doing justice in terms of explaining the genetics of this nematode, so I certainly encourage you to look into it on your own. There are research papers that are available that you can read on your own as well, and I can send some to Sean where you can learn about this nematode.
Okay.
But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and
crazy. It's crazy, yeah, that it was previously unknown. But that's what happens, like there's a lot of unknown microbes out there. But then once they start affecting, a certain tree or an animal where they cause a symptom, that's where we start exploring them and getting to know them, and we realize, oh my gosh, something completely new. So
yeah, you mentioned you're not doing justice to the genetics, but it sounds like there's a lot to learn still about.
there is a lot to
Yeah.
learn still. Yeah. And something I just want to throw out there in terms of if you have a beech tree in your yard, regardless of it being American beech or European beech or whatever kind of beech tree, if you're concerned about, protecting it, the best thing that you can do, say you don't want to apply pesticides, is, baby that tree. So try not to compact the soil around the root zone of that tree. If you're having a dry period, water that tree, even if that tree is 75 years old or more. All trees will appreciate supplemental water during dry or drought periods. So, take care of your trees.
Love your trees.
Mm.
We have really the same question asked twice here. Do we know for sure how these nematodes are spread from tree to tree or from region to region?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So these nematodes, at least the nematode that causes beech leaf disease, it really loves moisture, so it can spread from tree to tree just from the wind. They will just float in the wind. From wind-driven rain as well, it will spread throughout the tree and within a forest. Nursery stock is one way that it spreads across a region. If there's a European beech tree that was purchased in Ohio and it got dropped off on Long Island and it was infected and it wasn't previously known, well, that's the introduction of that pest to a region. That happens all the time. Other ways, this nematode, researchers have looked at this. Where is this nematode in a forest setting? And they find it everywhere. They find it on spider webs. They find it on caterpillars. So a caterpillar could, crawl over to another tree and brush up against a wet leaf, and then that nematode can then start either reproducing in the tree or find a bud and begin overwintering in it. Birds are a big spread of this nematode as well.
Yeah, someone mentioned maybe white-throated sparrows because they feed on the buds.
Yeah, somebody, a researcher did this really cool study where they filled up a bird feeder with various buds and put it in a forest setting, and they just observed what birds came to eat the beech buds. So there were a few different species. I can't recall the species right now. Probably somebody in the audience knows, but yeah, it's fascinating studies that are being done.
Yeah, and
Mina,
I
this
think
is Tamara from APIPP, and I think that's really helpful background because the first infestation found in Adirondack Park was actually in Herkimer County in a pretty remote area of a state forest, Ferris Lake Wild Forest. And so, it wasn't close to infestation. It is an area that's heavily used by recreationists, often in the fall with hunting. And we were all like, what's it doing there? How did it get
Mm.
so it wasn't, spread from tree to tree. It had really jumped to a fairly remote spot. But if it can be spread by birds, that would at least explain a little bit of kind of how it landed there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. See, I'm not as familiar with the infections that occur basically outside of my own county. So that's interesting to know that that was such an isolated tree. But unfortunately, yeah, birds can travel a distance and they are good transporters. I guess you can almost say vectors of this disease.
yeah, I think it's worth underscoring too. You mentioned a caterpillar could perhaps pick it up and
Oh,
carry it
yeah.
somewhere. Like these things are tiny, right? If a
Oh,
caterpillar is
sure.
picking up, like you're
Yeah,
not
your
going to see it.
shoes,
Yeah.
your shoes can definitely bring them, so if you have leaves that fall off of this tree, and like I said, after a rain, these nematodes come out and they are certainly falling to the ground. So if you're walking, you're picking up these nematodes in a forest that has beech leaf disease. So just kind of be mindful of that if you have uninfected trees on your own property.
Yeah, this is something that APIP does a lot to remind people of is, to brush off your hiking boots, your hiking gear, backpacks, jackets, whatever, before and after you're hiking on a trail, for example, or hunting or anything like that.
Okay.
We often think it's like plant fragments or seeds or something like that, but now we have this as well to be aware
Yeah,
of.
little microscopic organisms. Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
I'm really hoping something similar to what's happening with spotted lanternfly, in Pennsylvania. I believe there's a fungus that's affecting it. We're starting to get increased populations here in Suffolk County of spotted lanternfly, and it's like, okay, hopefully the fungus will follow and it will cause that reduction of this pest. So I'm hoping something like that happens with beech leaf disease. So just takes time.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So Mina did put her email in the chat. If anyone has any other questions for her, please come off mute. If I missed one that was in the chat, please feel free to come off mute and just ask her. Otherwise, we will bid her farewell and pass it off to Ari.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Sean. Ari, have fun with your presentation. And it was nice speaking with all of you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
that was fantastic. Thank you. Okay, Ari, if you'd like to share your screen, we can get you going.
Yeah. While I'm doing that, thank you so much to Mina. That was an amazing presentation. Um, I think my only comment is it's great to see so much collaboration between the horticultural industry, private sectors, public sectors. Very, very impressive. You're seeing the title presentation up there?
I can see it. Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
Good, good,
And
good
yeah,
check.
those field trials with the fluoropyram, with the broad form and agrifos, it seems like at least in a residential setting that they're finding a way to do it. And in terms of the flush of growth, I've seen that response from Reliant, from agrifos. So it's like Mina was saying, just loving your trees. So making sure that they're properly fertilized, not mulched too deep, watered correctly. There's hope on the landscape scale, but on the forest scale, I'm not sure that that's ever going to get approved, both for environmental concerns like fluoropyran with groundwater. It is definitely a concern, especially in Long Island, but just the scale of these beech forests. Beech trees occur everywhere, and it's heartening to hear that it's definitely an energy suck to the trees, but that it's 6+ years until there's full death. So in Herkimer County and Warren County, where we're sort of seeing the leading edge of beech leaf disease currently, I think this is where our Forest Pest Hunter volunteer rock stars can really come into play and at least get the best sense of where beech are, where beech leaf disease is and where it isn't is both super helpful information. And so that's what I'm going to be covering for the most part today. Give a rundown of Forest Pest Hunters, talk about how you can adopt a trail to conduct beech leaf disease surveys, some details of what the surveys would look like out in the field, and how to report that data in iMapInvasives. So let me take a quick time check. Yeah, I got about 20 minutes, so let me hop right into it. APIPP's been hosting Forest Pest Hunters for a number of years now. I think we're getting into our 4th season, I believe. So we have hemlock woolly adelgid surveys we do in the fall-winter season, and we're kicking off our beech leaf disease season right about this week, and it'll go until mid-October, I believe October 10th. It's super helpful for these emerging species within Adirondack Park, like I was saying, to really hone in on where these occurrences are. And then Brian Green is my aquatic equivalent within APIPP. And so if you're interested in detecting aquatic invasive species, on our volunteer, this link at the bottom here, you can see links to get involved with Forest Pest Hunters and the lake protectors and a variety of things. We welcome the help, and I see a lot of friends on here. Thank you for already helping and hopefully bringing some new people into the fold today as well. So we'll get into iMapInvasives later in the presentation, but this is just an example of hemlock willy adelgid. Some of you are familiar, probably most of you, but if not, these points are all Forest Pest Hunter points that were collected during winter seasons. And there's actually treatments and further surveys that are being conducted by partner agencies and DEC. So your help is really appreciated, and it really is getting folded directly back into management and further surveys. So thank you. And it's not just an exercise, but it's really directly going back into conservation efforts and control efforts. So for beech leaf disease, how do you get involved? We just, I think last week, got our Adopt a Trailhead map live. So if you take down this link, it's also on our website. It will get you to our Adopt a Trail map. And that's what it'll look like. You get a splash screen with a bunch of information, like a link to our survey protocol. But for each trail, you could pick one in an area that you're really interested in, something that's closer to home. Basically, the red points are the ones closest to known infestations, but given the rate of spread for the beech leaf disease nematode, it's really anywhere is fair game, but the red ones, you're most likely to find them. The orange ones are fair game too. And other APIP staff can correct me. I am not sure, like, I think you can go out and survey on private lands where you have permission, potentially on trails on state lands that aren't listed here. Any points that you're entering in IMAP are appreciated, but this is sort of the low-hanging fruit. These are areas that we know don't have information yet or could use more. These are our high priority areas. So basically you go through here, you click on one of these points, and it's each of these points is close to a trail, so you're hiking around. Sign up, it has you sign a quick like disclaimer, liability thing, and then it'll change to green. So you'll see the green ones have already been adopted. So that's sort of the first step to get involved for surveying a particular area. And I'll go through this fairly quickly. I think most folks are pretty pro with beech. But beech has like pretty coarsely toothed margins, and the midribs go all the way to the end of the leaf. And it's not unaffected. Beech leaves that don't have beech leaf disease are not going to be very hairy or sandpapery compared to Eastern hop hornbeam. Similar looking bark, but as you'll see, these teeth are way less coarse. There's way more dense teeth. So important to get your beech identification dialed before you do a survey. And like Mina was saying, like early on, you might not see this banding throughout the entire tree. So it's important to check multiple branches on each tree that you're looking at. Maybe 4 different points, you could do cardinal directions. But I certainly find if you're looking up with the sun shining down through the leaf, that's where the bands are more visible, versus looking down at the leaf, it's a little bit harder. So these are the sort of symptoms that you'd be seeing. So yeah, more pictures of beech leaf disease symptoms definitely hold up to the light. As it progresses more, probably as Mina was saying, like the buds being infected in repeat seasons, that's where you'll see this heavier banding. And earlier, and potentially in spots that we're looking at in the Adopt a Trail map, it might be a little bit harder to spot than this. So we want all the data. Points where it's more progressed and points where you're only seeing a few. Yeah, so this is a great demonstration of these are both infected with beech leaf disease, but so much more visible when you have light shining through it. And I wanted to go into, if you're going out and taking a close look at these beech trees and beech foliage, I imagine you're going to see other pests of beech that are maybe not as perilous to overall beech health and forest health, but certainly you want to identify what's beech leaf disease and what is something else. The uranium patch, Urified mite, Those are going to be more like spots, often yellow or orange. Anthracnose is a common pathogen to many different tree species. That's going to be more browning, typically on the margins of the leaf versus the banding. I included beech blight aphid. That's on the top right here, just because it's a fascinating pest. I don't think it's very widespread. They are particular to beech, but their defense mechanism against predators is sort of to like mass together and like sway and almost dance. So it sounds like a fascinating pest. I don't think that could be confused with beech leaf disease, but just a funky one. I think where it might get a little bit harder in terms of is it beech leaf disease or is it a pest of less concern is aphid damage. You'll often see discoloration and curling. So it's okay to take pictures and report as potential beech leaf disease. We'll get into how to report via iMapInvasives later, but your reports get verified by expert staff at iMapInvasives. So nothing wrong with taking a picture if you think it's beech leaf disease. We want to know about it, and it might get confirmed, or someone might say down the line, oh, that's probably aphid damage. So there is some ambiguity, especially with like more progressed beech leaf disease and aphids. And this is what I'm talking about. I mean, this banding looks awfully similar versus the beech leaf disease on the right. It does seem like more spots in the bands. So sort of like prick marks versus just like the uniform banding. But yeah, it's throughout the season, I'll be in touch as things come through in terms of observations. All the APIPP staff are happy to be a resource with this. But I wanted to give a brief rundown here of like things that you'll probably run into in the landscape in the forest as you're surveying for beech leaf disease. So when you're actually out surveying on your trail, what's the best way to conduct a survey? Beech, because of the clonal sort of like sprouts and growth, you might come into a stand, and that's where I would check multiple sides of the tree, check multiple branches on each tree. So we're on step 4 there. And then you're going to enter your findings in iMapInvasives. I think a really good methodology here would be if you're checking multiple trees and say you're hiking like 1/8 of a mile, 1/4 mile, take a point where you start looking through the stand, a part where you end looking through the stand, some points in between too, but that way you have a good marker to sort of keep track, like this stand has been covered. You have a start point and a stop point. And like I said, I'll get into reporting via iMapInvasives. You can also get in touch with the New York DEC, but they are looking at iMapInvasives. I think that that's the best way to report. It's really centralized both for citizen science, like citizen scientists, like a lot of you folks, but a lot of partner agencies and DEC themselves are putting that information on there too. So we're really lucky in New York to have iMapInvasives as a resource. And then step 6, hike, repeat. You might have multiple stands. So it's have fun out there. Potentially keep an eye out for hemlock woolly adelgid too. There's a lot of sort of co-occurrence in terms of the leading edge of these invasives, at least around Lake George. And then we added a new step to this year's survey protocol. That's step 7. Probably once you're done with your hike, I would say, before you go to a different area geographically, is to sanitize at least your boots. Mina was talking about it. Thank you for the Q&A questions where this was already brought up. But brushing off your boots is a good idea. When I did plant healthcare as a residential arborist, we certainly did this with boxwood blight pathogens. So I would say with something microscopic like a fungus or a nematode, I don't think just a boot brush would cut it. So we had 2 different approaches, either making a bleach solution in, say, a 5-gallon bucket, diluting it down with water, or using an aerosol, like Lysol type spray. So I would spray like the lugs of my boots down with that and then work it through with a boot brush. So that would definitely be appreciated this season, especially if you're in an area, you're taking your gear back to an area that doesn't have beech leaf disease currently. It's every little bit helps. We don't know exactly the mechanism of spread yet, but it seems like human spread on equipment and clothing definitely could be a factor. So yeah, please sanitize in between survey trips and after you finish surveying for the day. Would be much appreciated. So another thing, when you're looking at beech, like how do you identify, instead of looking up the whole time to identify the leaves, beech bark? It's normally smooth. A healthy beech is normally smooth, and that's what you're seeing on the top left. But beech bark disease is pretty prevalent, I think, across the entire state of New York, but certainly within the Adirondacks. It's a disease complex. So there's a scale that actually opens up little holes in the bark. And then there's a fungus that infects the cambium of the tree. So that's pretty bad on the bottom right there. But a lot of times you'll find beech with this going on. It's not something that needs to be mapped necessarily or noted, but definitely worth noting when you're looking for beech. It's not always going to be the smooth silver bark that you're seeing on the top left. The middle picture is more indicative of what I normally see out in the forest. So to zoom out a bit before we get into how you're using iMapInvasives to report your survey observations is just getting out in the woods and good practices there. So goodness gracious, keeping an eye on the weather. I like to use NOAA weather data versus weather.com or other sources. I just find it to be more accurate. If you're hiking at higher elevations, you can just put in Google like NOAA mountain point forecast. It's pretty cool for a lot of mountains in the Northeast. They'll have like weather estimates for higher elevation mountain peaks. And so if you really want to nerd out about weather and make sure there's not crazy storm coming through, you can really hone in on weather conditions for local mountain areas using that. You also need a smartphone if you're reporting via iMapInvasives. DEC has great trail maps on their website. If you're sticking to a trail, it might not be as necessary, but for most different parcels of DEC land, they actually have geo-referenced PDFs. So it's a map you can print out. It's also a map that you can upload to a cell phone app like Avenza or Gaia GPS. So then you're using your map on your phone, but if your GPS is enabled, you can be a blue dot on DEC's map. So that's very cool. I don't know how recently the DEC has been doing that, but it's a pretty nifty feature. And I can always, people can always reach out to me and I can give people a rundown of like some of these map and weather links. But yeah, I mean, emergency blanket might not be bad just in terms of preparing for the worst. Definitely a headlamp or flashlight. That also might be helpful for just seeing the potential banding and the actual surveying for beech leaf disease. And yes, water, snack, safety gear, more than you expect. And then it's like almost like having an umbrella. If you have what you need, things are more likely to go correctly. And to be honest, I'm new, right? I just started this spring. So I'm excited for the Q&A for the forest pest hunters that have done beech leaf disease surveys in the past to chime in terms of what surveys are like. But yeah, it seems generally like you're hiking a trail. It's not like most of them are going to be beech everywhere you look. So get to a stand, check multiple branches on each tree, maybe a zigzag through a stand if it's larger. But also be careful just navigation wise. If it's a stand that goes, it's pretty large, make sure you know where you are relative to the trail so you can get back and continue your survey and ultimately get back to the trailhead and your vehicle safely. Another important note certainly is non-observations are very important too. We want to know where beech leaf disease is, but we also want to know where it is not. So putting in observations that just say beech leaf disease is not present is incredibly helpful, because then other folks can know survey was already done here. It just happened to be a negative finding right now. We're happy with that. Quick reminder about 10 essentials. We went over a lot of this. But yeah, how about these weather changes over the last couple of days from this weekend to last night? It's be prepared. It was like tank top weather over the weekend and it got to about 50 in Keene last night. So it's fall is coming, or at least it feels like. So now to get into some more nitty-gritty technical information in terms of iMapInvasives. It's an amazing program. So many data points from citizen sciences, partner agencies. APIPP uses this in terms of uploading all of our staff data periodically. And so when you register, you want to do part of this on a computer, on a desktop, and then set it up on your phone. So I'll walk you through briefly how to do both. So on the website, if you have a login, you log in on the top. If not, you can sign in just by putting your information in here. You want to make sure that you put in your jurisdiction as New York at this point. And then you'll probably get an email to confirm. So once you're set up with your login information, this is what the general IMAP screen looks like. You have your main menu on the top left, you're navigating the map here, and your action tools, and different layers that you can toggle on and off. So for Forest Pest Hunters, when you're creating your account, you're putting New York, and then the project, you want to make sure it's APIPP Volunteer Forest Pest Monitoring. I think once you type in APIPP Volunteer, it sort of will autofill, but this is very helpful for us so we can keep track of data, like which of these observations is coming in through our Forest Pest Hunter group. If you're not copying down the information from these slides, it's completely fine. On our APIPP website, we have the same tutorials. I just wanted to pull some screenshots from some of this to show you what I'm talking about as I'm talking about it. But this isn't the only chance for anybody to access this information. Exactly. So you go to your preferences, project page, and request to join this APIPP Volunteer Forest Pest Monitoring group. So now you're pretty set up to use your phone via the App Store, whether it's Android or Apple. You get your iMapInvasives app. You log in with your same credentials that you created on the IMAP website. And then you can go out, and when you're in the field, whether you have service or not at this point, you can add observations. So this is what it's going to look like on your phone. The top right, circled lightly in red, is the add observation. So as you're doing your survey, each observation, you want to hit the add observation tab. This is what opens up. So you take your picture, select your species, the beech leaf disease nematode. Beech leaf disease is what I typically type in, and it'll autofill. And then, oh, let me go back, sorry. Very importantly is your detect or non-detect. If you're not sure, say what you think is most likely. Again, someone will be reviewing it before it gets confirmed in the IMAP database. And hopefully your GPS is enabled. For most phones, that should be fine even if you don't have service. But like, I don't think it would work in airplane mode necessarily. So you want to make sure that your location is live when you're taking these observations. Your project should already say Forest Pest Hunters if you do that setup we talked about before. And then when you hit save, that observation is saved in your phone. An important note is when you get back into service, you'll see like a whole list of the observations you took. At that point, you need to say upload when you're back in service, and that'll upload your observations from your survey day or your hike. That's what actually submits it to iMapInvasive staff to review and ultimately get posted into the main database. When you're taking these observations, pictures are super important. I think this picture to the right is beech leaf disease, but if I were one of the experts confirming on iMapInvasives in terms of does this get counted as a confirmation, there's some ambiguity there. So the clearer the pictures, the better. And again, holding the leaf up to the light source is super useful. And an important note, there's only one picture per area that you're allowed to submit. So this is just a general sort of zooming out from your particular survey work to what iMapInvasives looks like on the desktop or web version. When you create this account, it also gives you access to like all of the data within iMapInvasives. So something I do a lot on the home screen that we talked about before, you can filter records. So this is where I typed beech leaf disease. I can't spell out the full name of the nematode, but it auto-filled for me. Hit apply, and these points are showing where confirmed beech leaf disease points were recorded. And thank you to some partners that are on this call today and Forest Pest Hunters for putting a lot of these points on here. It also illustrates the process, like this purple point is one of the unconfirmed present species layer versus the green have been confirmed. So don't be alarmed if once you upload, if you don't see your points in IMAP right away, because it is a process, should be fairly quick, like within the same business week, but it needs to get confirmed by staff and then it will show up in this main database. And there's much more you can do if you want to look at hemlock adelgid, other forest pests, distribution of really anything invasive, forest pest, plant, aquatic invasive. iMapInvasives is just such an amazing tool, and filtering can really hone in on getting to what you want to look at versus there's a lot of points when you first log in and start clicking around. So the filtering is a good call. And some other tips. I really like, you can use the fake species record to test out at home, sort of do a trial run before you get out and do your survey. Those are fine to submit. They sort of get disregarded by IMAP staff, but that's a good way to sort of like do a dummy version and just try things out. Again, feel free, it's encouraged to report non-detect surveys. And in your preferences, you can also, on the web version, create a custom species list. So if you know you're going to be using IMAP on your phone just to look for beech leaf disease or adelgid, you can put particular species in your custom list. And then on your phone, go to preferences, retrieve IMAP lists. That way, for each observation, you're not having to type in beech leaf disease or adelgid. It'll shorten that list of hundreds of species down to what you put in your custom list. So not a requirement, but definitely a pro tip. It'll help sort of minimize the scrolling around while you're in there. And if you need help, feel free to reach out to both APIPP staff, and iMapInvasives also has a great rundowns of a lot of this on their website. So a quick sort of cannonball rundown of surveying, iMapInvasives, and I should put a link to our website in here too, in terms of, like I said, it wasn't your only chance to see that information. But hopefully helpful for everybody.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
Ari's doing that. I did put a link to our volunteer page in there as well.
cool.
So Ari mentioned lake protectors. That'll take you to both the lake protectors and the forest pest hunters information. And also, he talked a little bit about photography, and that one picture on the right that you showed was a really good example of how sometimes, iMapInvasives will get photos and we people can't tell what's in the photos. So, as Ari mentioned before, good photography is really important, so people can identify what you're sending in. So there is a link in the chat as well to a video that APIPP did about a year and a half ago. If you're interested in photography in general or want some tips on plant photography, it's a really good video. Go check it out. One tip I can give the group too is you mentioned having a light background, and that's not just the sky. You could put a notebook or anything light colored that you have in your backpack behind what you're photographing to make it pop a little more, and that way it doesn't get quite as lost in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Does anyone have any questions for Ari? Going once, going twice. I don't see any in the chat. All right. Well, if you think of anything, feel free to hop in. real quick here, we're going to go over the pesticide credits again. We have 1.25 credits available, categories 2, 3A, 9, 10, and 25. Again, you have to complete a 10-question evaluation by noon on Friday, and you need to score 70%, so 7 out of 10 questions correct. Please, please, please fill out. There's 2 address lines in that quiz for you to fill out. Please fill them both out so we can mail the certificates to you. And I'm going to put the link in the chat right now. Okay, there you go. That quiz is live right now, and it will be live through noon on Friday. So please hop in the chat and get that link. And while you're all doing that, I want to give a quick plug. Ari mentioned the Lake Protectors program. We have a Lake Protectors training, an in-person one coming up. We generally do at least 3 a year. One is virtual. We did that in June. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can watch that. But Brian, that's Brian Green in the picture there with the 2 plants in his hands. He'll be leading the workshop at the, excuse me, Adirondack Interpretive Center in Newcomb. And that's coming up on August 16th from 9 a.m. to about noon. And that's a lot of fun because a lot of times Brian will talk for a little bit, but then you'll actually get a chance to go out with him and look for some species with him. So it's a really great chance to kind of learn and have some hands-on experience. And then we have our Adirondack Invasive Species Summit 2024 coming up on October 10th. That's going to be a real exciting summit. It's going to be at Tannery Pond Community Center in North Creek. We're going to have 4 or 5 guest speakers, some of them coming from way outside the area speaking. They're going to be talking about climate change adaptability, how that relates to invasive species. And then they're going to also talk about how technology is giving us hope for dealing with things like climate change and invasive species in the future. Kind of as Mina talked a little bit earlier about beech leaf disease and how with research and whatnot, we're starting to feel like we're gaining a little ground on figuring this thing out. So you'll hear more about that and invasive species in this summit. APIPP also has free outreach materials available. You can see them here on your screen. The top 3 over here are some brochures that we have. If you have a business, an Airbnb, a visitor center, anything like that, and you'd like to order some, please reach out. They're all free. And then we have posters here. They go through, just good practice tips on how to prevent spreading invasive species. There's a little bit of information about invasive species in each one. And then we also have our field guide to terrestrial invasive species of the Adirondacks. That goes through, I believe it's 28 invasive species. Almost all of them are found in the Adirondacks. There's 1 or 2 in there that aren't quite here yet. We hope they never show up, but we have some ID for those 2 species as well. And yeah, there's some great information here about how to identify plants and things like that. So if you're interested in this guide, it's like kind of like a pocket guide, feel free to reach out to us. And make sure you get that link in the chat if you need to take the quiz. Does anyone else have any questions for Ari? Okay, does everyone have the link if you're taking that quiz? All right, if we're all set, I think we'll say goodbye. Feel free to reach out to us, follow up via email if you have any questions, and we will get back to you. Have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. Be well.